everyone. This is Rhiannon Payne, Marketing Director at Ruby Central, and I'm here today with Marty Haught, our Director of Open Source. Marty has been leading the team behind maintaining and securing essential tools like RubyGems, RubyGems.org, and Bundler. The RubyGems team will be presenting next week at the final RailsConf in Philadelphia, and Marty will be on a panel alongside Ruby and Rails legends like Kinsey Durham-Grace, Nadia, Evan Phoenix, and more. I'm very excited to chat with Marty today about this coming RailsConf, as well as his favorite memories from previous conferences and what folks should expect. So thank you, Marty. It's great having you here.
Thank you, Rhiannon.
Absolutely. We're super excited for next week. Today is July 4th, Friday before the conference, so we're just a few days out. We're both getting ready to jump on planes. How are you feeling about everything?
Yeah, I feel great. I think this is a conference where I'm not doing as much beyond I'm on a panel, but I'm not organizing that like I used to for many years. And I'm not speaking beyond being on a panel. So it's great. It's fantastic. We have our hack space. So many of the members of the team will be there. So looking forward to engaging with the community.
That's awesome. So who from the Ruby Central open source team will be at the conference this year?
Yeah, so Samuel Giddens, who's our security engineer, will be there. We've got Martin MD, we've got Andre Arco, myself, and Arun from India will be coming over, and also Mache Binsfeld will be visiting us in Philadelphia.
I'm very excited for Hack Spaces. I think we've really solidified what we're doing with this day and reframing it as Community Day and making it really a choose your own adventure day as an attendee where you can participate in workshops, interactive panels, go to all these amazing hack spaces. I think that is just going to be so much fun. I'd love to chat a little bit about the panel that you're participating in on Community Day.
Yeah, Kinsey's put this panel together. She's gathered many of us who have been involved with RailsConf over the years, and we're going to be up on stage. And she's got a lot of questions to explore the past, so how it developed, where things have gone over the years, and something where we think the future is going. And so I think it's going to be fun. It'll be great to hear everyone's different perspective on it, and maybe there'll be some interesting stories that come out from the panel.
So maybe a little bit of a teaser. What do you think the future of Rails is?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about that. I think it's been interesting in that the longevity of the framework and the language as something that still a lot of companies use and find very productive. I don't think that's ever changed really. I think there has been some renewed interest in the last couple of years. Certainly the one person startup using Rails to be incredibly productive. We've known that Rails has always been a framework that a single developer could build a lot very quickly, and it's also maintainable. So I think that's playing into this popularity. Still, startups are choosing it, which is exciting to see. So I don't see that changing dramatically. And maybe with AI becoming more prominent as a tooling choice to help speed up development, that Ruby will become even more popular as a language for its readability and just pleasure to use.
Mhm. Yeah, that's been coming up a lot actually in conversations I've been having with different RailsConf speakers, as well as in our quarterly consultants call. A lot of folks have been saying that because of the very clear conventions in Rails, it's a lot easier compared to other languages to actually vibe code and use these AI tools to enhance their workflows. Hopefully, more and more folks will realize that Rails is a great choice for building with in the AI age. And I would love to talk about what your team is going to be presenting on day one of the conference, which is Tuesday. I think they're going on at 2:45, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken. So what can we expect there?
Yeah, so this is going to be a fun talk. We've commonly done sort of a state of Ruby Gems talk at the conferences, and this is a little bit different. Samuel Giddens and Nick Quantro will be presenting together the history of RubyGems.org as a Rails application and how it's progressed from the very beginning. Nick was the original author of that Rails application. It was called Gem Cutter back in the day. I think it's going to be really interesting to hear that arc of development and how they approach things like security and gem selection and just all the various things that have come up over the years that they've had to overcome as the scale of the application has really shot up because it was not used anywhere close to the scale that it is now back in 2009 when it was developed. I think it'll be a great sort of history lesson and also a reflection of how the team tackled issues with that.
Yeah, I think that context is going to be really interesting for folks at the conference, especially newer Rails developers who maybe have only been in the ecosystem for the last few years. Obviously, there's a huge emphasis at this year's conference as the final RailsConf looking back at the journey of the past few decades and the evolution of Rails. Do you think is understanding that journey and that context something that can be really important or really help in the day-to-day work?
Yeah, I would think so. I think there's a lot of times where things we've discussed or lessons we've learned 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they do come back up. And I think that it's a good thing to study your history and be aware of like how things progressed, why people made the choices they did, or like the challenges that they're faced and how they overcame them. Things are quite different today than they were back then, but there's still, in terms of how you construct and design modern software, there's a lot of timeless principles that we all faced back in the beginning when we started using Rails in 2005. And so, like, digging into those stories and the lessons learned over those years, I think can be very useful to anyone, especially if they're brand new. There's so much there that I think will help them be more productive, will help them make better design decisions about how they construct their software. And I think so from that standpoint, it'd be great for them to dig into that.
I was speaking the other day to Ratnadeep, who's one of our speakers this year. His talk is about 20 years of design decisions in Rails, so that's another one I'm looking forward to too.
Yeah.
I would love to talk a little bit about, I know you've been part of this community almost since the beginning. You've been to probably a lot more of the conferences than most people. From your perspective, how do you think that this year's conference is going to compare to some of the previous ones? And what are you most looking forward to? What do you think is going to make this final RailsConf really unique and special for the community?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to explore. So we've had roughly 20 years of Rails conferences, Rails comps over the years, and I was at the first one in 2006 in Chicago. I've been to most of them. I haven't been to all of them. When I was organizing as a conference organizer for Ruby Central, it was very intense to do two conferences a year as a chair. And so oftentimes I was chairing RubyConf and I would take RailsConf off and have Evan or Sarah or someone else chair the conference. I've been to enough over the years where it is interesting to see how the content and the conversations have shifted. In the very beginning, everything was so emergent. It was like the Wild West, the great wide open spaces where there were so many things to solve, where you had a blank page in front of you. How do you deploy? How do you monitor? How do you scale? All these things, these were brand new because no one had really done that before. And so I think that's super exciting. And so those early years were marked by that. And it was an incredibly unique time, 2006 and 2007. It was electric. People were experimenting. They're trying this. Here's how we're going to try and solve this problem. And no, there's a better way. So each year it felt like there was some new pattern or some new approach that was taking hold. And that was now the way to do it. And I think what's really nice about that is you can just see the community learning, experimenting, and adapting each year. And so those early years was largely that was just front and center in how things were developing. I think post 2011, 2012, things had simmered down. There was the whole Rails Ruby is dead movement. There was now people were switching over to Node and to JavaScript as their primary framework. There were other frameworks that were like Elixir that were very enticing. And so there was this like, okay, what happens now? It turns out that there were still tons of companies building and scaling up their applications. Many of these Ruby on Rails applications, these businesses became quite successful. Shopify is a great example. GitHub's another great example. Stripe. though Stripe doesn't use Rails, it is still you had these companies scaling up over these years. And so the content changed to, okay, how do we scale? How are we maturing? At that point, there weren't as many new ideas necessarily, but there was still refinement. And so I think the pandemic years were especially challenging for everyone from so many aspects. Now we're starting to come back to where we have more of the attendance levels that we used to have. And also there seems to be more excitement about Ruby and Ruby on Rails than there was around the pandemic. There seemed to be a lot less. And that could have just been the pandemic, honestly. But I think with this year's event, what is really interesting is we're purposely reflecting on this last 20 years. And I think there's something special about that. I think this is a great exercise, by the way, that we should all be doing regularly, which is reflecting on what we've done, what we've worked on. And in that reflection, you can think about what's next. How do we move forward? And what are we going for? What does that next chapter look like? So I think there's something really special when you intentionally spend time that way. I'm looking forward to all the conversations. Hallway track is almost always my favorite part of the conference, and I spend most of my time there. I'm really looking forward to these conversations and reflecting on the memories that we've had over the years.
Yeah, I think for any conference, collectively, we should be talking about things that have happened before and what's going to happen next. And those are things that are discussed, but going into this final RailsConf, we're doing so with such shared collective intention between us as staff members at Ruby Central and the entire community and the 700 something attendees who are joining us in Philly. I think that will be really special. So I'm looking forward to that as well and just to seeing what comes out of this. I've heard stories from earlier Rails and Ruby comps where things like RubyGems, these fundamental technologies that have absolutely changed the ecosystem have come out of these conferences, come out of conversations that have been had. I'm looking forward to seeing afterward what's going to come out of this final RailsConf because I have a feeling it'll be something special.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you a little bit about the open source program because I think there's a lot of people out there who don't have a clear understanding of what it is we're working on. So I'd love to hear from you. What is the open source program? How does that work?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and it's a question that we continue to ask ourselves, really. So fundamentally, when Ruby Together merged with Ruby Central back in 2022, the maintenance and operations of RubyGems.org and RubyGems and Bundler as tools that our ecosystem rely on came under one roof. So Ruby Central has always been the one hosting RubyGems.org from the beginning since 2003, 2004 really is when it went live publicly, but it's always run on our infrastructure. Ruby Together for many years, since 2015, was the team that actually ran the servers and did all the maintenance primarily. And so when the team merged with Ruby Central, we established the open source committee. And that group is there to oversee the operations of the program. What should it be? Because there was a lot of questions. Certainly at its most basic, it is running rubygems.org as a service for the community and making sure that RubyGems and Bundler are maintained and have regular releases. And we basically are stewards of that. The question of, is that all that this program is? We were pretty clear that it shouldn't be just that. Ruby Central as an organization, its purpose is to advance the Ruby ecosystem through education, through our conferences, through supporting the community. That's the heart of what Ruby Central is about. And so when you combine this open source program where we're running rubygems.org, is that just it? No, it shouldn't be just it. It should be more than that. So we think about what are impactful open source projects out there that could use some support. What does that look like? We have to be cautious and careful because we don't want to take on too much that we can't support. So there's a piece of how quickly this ramps up, but it could be that we want to help with funding. We want to help with structure and tooling for maintainers of important projects, RubyGems, that could use that support. We also think about, could it be that we help bring in the next generation, encourage an on-ramp for OSS maintainers? We don't really know exactly what all these things look like, But we know that these things are important, and we want to think about the health of the ecosystem long term and what should our role be. So we have the operations of the critical infrastructure, which is rubygems.org. We have this idea of how do we support impactful open source projects, especially if they're projects that maybe are no longer actively maintained, or the maintainer wants to get out of maintaining them, and yet they're still used by a lot of Ruby applications out there. We don't want those to languish or become a security vulnerability. So how do we interact with that? How do we support that? It could be very active. It could be more like we facilitate bringing on new maintainers to maintain those projects. And these are conversations with the community. It's not so much that Marty or his OSS committee makes those decisions and forces that on the community. It's more, okay, what can we do to encourage and facilitate good, healthy behavior in our open source community? And what role can we play with that? And the final piece, of course, is how do we bring in sort of new developers that might want to get involved and train them up, give them access, and make sure that they're successful.
Yeah, I think there really is so much almost invisible work that our open source team does behind the scenes to make sure that this ecosystem keeps running smoothly. Obviously, we all rely on RubyGems. I think that it is such a credit to you and your team that the work is so invisible, 100% uptime for over 10 years now.
Yeah,
So,
that's hats off to the team. The team's fantastic. They really know what they're doing. They've made it so that they can maintain this infrastructure without a lot of time and effort. So we're incredibly lean and scrappy, and that served us well. But I think the other piece, as what you're alluding to, is that it's invisible work. And haven't been very vocal about it, certainly in the last few years. And we want to change that. We want the community be aware of what goes into running this program, and that we really appreciate their support. And it's vital for sustainability. In the last couple of years, we've had a lot of grant funding come in, which is fantastic and lovely, but that's money from outside the community. And it's also money that isn't renewable. Maybe I can apply for another grant or two, but some of those grants are, you don't apply again for them. It's like, that was the money you had for this purpose, and now you have to look for another source. And so there's a question in my mind, which is how do we sustainably, renewably fund these operations and not make it something that we expect volunteers to take on a lot of obligation, whereas can they be paid full time, and how do we maintain that for years to come?
yeah. And I'm looking forward to us having those conversations with the community at the conference next week. And I think that's one thing that's really cool. The fact that Ruby Central is this umbrella that houses both the open source program and the conferences and this incredible community work that's on the other side of the organization. The fact that we are creating these spaces for the community to come together, have these discussions, and for you and our open source team to get in front of folks and collaborate and share ideas. I think that there's something so wonderful about the way those things intersect and merge in this organization. It's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fascinating job. I've never had anything quite like this in the past. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot around security that I haven't ever gone deep on, has mainly been on the product side of building engineering orgs and all that. It's really interesting. And I think there's a lot of potential for where this program can go. And I'm looking forward to sort of scaling that up over the coming years.
Yeah. What's been the biggest learning curve for you? What's the thing that's been like, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting this?
There's a thing called the Cyber Resilience Act that's been passed in the European Union that's going to impact how products that are in the European market have to report vulnerabilities and think about cybersecurity first. And that is something new. Again, I don't have a security background, so I've been on a crash course of learning about these things. And part of my role is to figure out what that looks like and then help the community adapt when these things take effect in 2026 and 2027, so that it's not onerous and our tooling is in place so that the companies that will be have to comply with these regulations will find it a little easier to do.
Yeah, making it a smooth transition for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So last question for you, Marty. Again, you've been to quite a few RailsConfs over the years. Do you have a favorite memory that sticks out? I'm sure there's a lot, but is there anything that you just look back and smile thinking about?
I say there's probably three memories that are fairly prominent for me. First was the initial RailsConf. I had only been doing Ruby for about 6 months or so, maybe 9 months. I was like a kid in the candy store. It was, like I said, it was electric, the atmosphere. And there was this performance by Why the Lucky Stiff and his band that was like, what is even happening? It's just really fascinating. There's so many things from that conference. The next memory that is very near and dear to my heart was when we launched the Scholars and Guides program. This is something I brought over from my conference, Rocky Mountain Ruby, and this happened in 2013 in Portland. This was the initial launch here at the scale and for RailsConf, and just like how impactful that was for those scholars that joined and the guides that stepped forth. This is something that's brand new. No one knew what to expect, and guiding that in its first inception was really so special for me. And I guess the other memory that stood out was I gave a workshop in Baltimore in, I think it was 2011, and hadn't done a workshop before. And so I had a lot of people join and I didn't have any helpers. So it was a lesson. Oh, I had 80 people and a workshop, which is really ridiculous. It was fine, very memorable in terms of how active I was for those 3 hours in that workshop with the attendees.
Yeah, I feel like that was probably terrifying in the moment, but funny in hindsight.
You're in it. It's like,
Yeah,
this is what we have. We're just gonna make the best with it.
it is
And
what it is.
yeah,
Roll with it. I love that. And yeah, I'm excited to hear more of these stories at RailsConf next week. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of folks who've been in this ecosystem for a long time excited to share those memories. Thank you so much, Marty, for your time today. I'm excited to see you in a couple days. Jumping on a flight in less than 48 hours.
ooh, yeah.
Wild.
There we go.
Yep. Anyway, I will see you there and thank
Sounds
you
good.
again.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was great.